I would like to introduce our speaker. I mentioned earlier that I'm the keeper of the archive. In reality, keepers come, people who hold this function come and go, but the real authentic keeper of the archive is actually Mike Riordan. He's been keeping the archive in the shape it is, but also improving it and help the general public and alumni and students access it for over 2 decades now. And Mike is not only doing that for us, he's doing the same for Queen's College. Mike is also a researcher, historian of the 16th century, and he's a fellow of the Royal Society of Antiquaries. I think you're in for a treat, for a treasure trove. You will discover quite a bit tonight with Michael. And without further ado, Mike, would you like to begin?
Well, thank you very much, Mohammed Salah. It was very kind of you. What we thought we'd do tonight is we probably haven't got enough time to give you a full overview of the archive. So really, I'm just going to select what we've called some treasures. So just some items that are particularly interesting or particularly attractive in some way. And we've got I put a PowerPoint presentation together just to show you some of these. And please, if you've got any questions about them or anything else to do with the archive, as Mohammed Salah says, do put in the chat and I'll try and answer it later. But I perhaps should say something about the archive itself first, because it might surprise you to know that there has been a college archive right since the very foundation of the college. And what we have up on the screen at the moment is a page from the original college statutes, which I'll talk a bit more about in a minute. And this is the statute that governs how the archive should be run. It's written in Latin, so I've got a, if I can get this to work, a quick a sort of paraphrase translation here, which says, evidences, charters, muniments and other writings should be kept so that the men of our college, when challenged to suits and arms, may be always ready and not march to the pitched battle unarmed. Which is a splendid piece, stolen, I'm afraid, from the Statutes of Corpus Christi College, which had been founded 40 years before St. John's, but reminds us that the original idea of the archive was so that we had evidence to protect the college's income and rights. And this is a useful reminder that muniments, the slightly old-fashioned term for archives, has the same root as munitions, and reminds us that these really are sort of, the archive is a collection of weapons in many ways. So originally the archive physically was in the gate tower over what's now the main lodge, and would have been above the bursar's room, and would have been therefore very secure. It moved in the mid-20th century to beneath the senior common room. Back in 2003, I moved it with the assistance of the college's stonemasons to the basement of St. Giles House. And then in 2012, we moved it here to Kendrewcod, and it's on the other side of this wall behind me. I'm sitting in the reading room where visitors come and look at, or at least where they used to come to look at items from the archive. So I've already mentioned and showed you a bit of the statutes, and that seems like a sensible place to start. And this is the college statutes of 1562. And this is the rather splendid opening page. And one can see the college's coat of arms. That's Thomas White's personal coat of arms as well. And then above it is this rather curious picture. Precisely who is displayed here is not entirely clear. Immediately beneath it, it says to the honor of the Holy and Undivided Trinity, which makes one think it could be the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. But equally, the figure on the left looks very much like St. John the Baptist, which obviously makes sense as the title of the college. And perhaps the other figure might be Elizabeth I, who by this point has already been on the throne for 4 years, with a bird of some sort between them. Or I would suggest, alternatively, it could even be meant to be King Philip and Queen Mary, who were the monarchs when the college was founded, but Mary had since died, and Philip, better known as Philip II of Spain, was no longer King of England. You might notice that the two figures are done in a slightly different colour ink than the rest of the drawing, and it's quite clear, I think, that in the figure that might be Queen Elizabeth, I'm not sure if you'll be able to see it here, but it looks like something's been rubbed out and redone there. So my opinion is that this is probably designed to be whatever you want it to be. So in a college full of people with fairly Catholic sympathies at the time, but needing to conform to Elizabeth's Protestant church, having a slightly ambivalent picture of the statutes might actually appeal to them. What's rather more obvious is this right at the bottom of the first page, where it has been signed by me, Thomas White, Knight and Alderman. And in fact, Thomas White signs every single page, although for most of them, he drops the Knight and Alderman. Moreover, if there's been an error, like here where a line has had to be inserted, again, he signed both sides of the line to authenticate it. So this is him making it absolutely clear that nothing can be added. This is the statutes as he intended them to be. If we go back to that first page, you might see just underneath the coat of arms, it says John Beerblock Scriptor. So John Beerblock is the man who has written this book of statutes. And just to make sure we haven't missed it, he signs it an initial letter, Johannes Beerblockus, as well. Beerblock was a fellow of the college from about 1560. He was appointed personally by the founder until 1566, when he left to become a fellow of Exeter College. And in that same year, he illustrated the book that was given to Queen Elizabeth when she visited Oxford. And he drew out all of the colleges. This is not from the original, this is from a very good edition of the book that's in the Bodleian by Louise Durning of Lincoln College. And this is Beerblock's drawing of St. John's. So at this point in 1566, we've simply got the front quad, and then you can just see the kitchen on the side in what's now North Quad. Beerblock is probably most famous for this drawing of the Divinity School, which many of you will recognise as being the Bodleian's logo, is modelled on Beerblock's drawing. But Beerblock also did various other nice things in the statutes. I hope you can make out the little face in this initial letter. I rather like it. I sort of hope it might be a self-portrait of Beerblock. It's certainly not the founder. Alternatively, as this part of the statute is about the oath that the president will swear, I wonder if this might be a picture of the president of the time. And just one other little thing he added to the statutes that is rather nice: Jesus Johanni Faviat. So John, whom Jesus loved. Unfortunately, of course, this is the evangelist rather than the Baptist, and so is a little bit of Cambridge thrown into our statutes. When I arrived in the college, the statutes book was kept in this rather splendid little bag with a separate piece for the seal. I rather fondly like to think that was made from a pair of old curtains from the president's lodgings, perhaps in the late 19th or early 20th century, but there's no evidence for that. We've since taken it out of there, and the importance of this volume means that it's one of only 2 items in the archive that is actually kept in a wooden box rather than a cardboard box. Well, so we have the statutes. So perhaps the next thing to look at is the foundation deed. And this, again, you can see Thomas White's signature on it, and there is a seal attached to it. I should just remove the seal so we can zoom in and see the deed in more detail. Again, it's written in Latin, and this is dated 29th of May 1555, and it is of course that date that we take the foundation of the college from. However, we also have this deed, which is also signed by the founder, although his signature is hidden by the little flap, which is right at the bottom, which is used to support the seal. And this is what we call the second foundation deed. And this is dated the 5th of March, 1558. So why do we have two foundation deeds? In reality, this one relates to the start of the college as a functioning institution. And it's really at the beginning of 1558 when we have people present on site and education is taking place. And the first deed, however, I believe is set up, and he names the president and several fellows. And I think the idea is it creates the college as an institution so that should the founder die, then the money he has set aside for the college is already in the hands of the president and a group of fellows. And so the college already has a legal existence. So though in practical terms, this is when the college begins, I think we're still quite right to legally date the foundation from 1555. I think you'll all be pleased to hear that, I'm sure. So one might think that this is the foundation deed, this is therefore going to be the oldest thing in the archive. But in fact, we have numerous items much older than this. As we saw at the beginning, the idea of keeping the archive is to provide evidence of the college's properties. And so when you buy a property, as we do to this day, you quite often get the older deeds come with it. And so this is what purports to be the oldest deed in the college and dates supposedly to about 1130, 1140. And again, I'll remove the seal just to give you a better view of the deed. You've probably noticed I've been using words like purports to be, and that's because this is in fact a forgery. It purports to be from the mid-12th century. It is in fact from the mid-13th century. So only 100 years younger than it claims. And we can tell this because this sort of type of handwriting just wouldn't have been used in the mid-12th century. What's clearly happened, this incidentally is a deed to the canons of St George's Chapel in Oxford Castle. Claims to be from Robert de Oily, whose father fought at the Battle of Hastings with William the Conqueror and got Oxford Castle as a result of that. And it's given him land in what we would now call North Oxford. St John's bought that land in 1563, I think, 67, sorry. And so this deed almost certainly came with it. However, in the 13th century, that land belonged to Osney Abbey. And it seems that Osney, having known that they owned this land and knowing that this deed presumably once existed, decided it was better if it did exist, and so recreated it. And we know that there are also another 2 or 3 deeds in the same hand relating to the same land in Christchurch archives. And so we have at least 3 of these forged. And it seems that Osney did a good deal of business forging deeds in order to, I think it did it quite innocently in a sense, in knowing that they just wanted to provide better evidence for their ownership of the land should they be challenged. And clearly they actually had the seal matrix of Robert de Oily. And so in a sense, the seal is the only genuine part of the deed. And if that is the case, and this is a forgery, then there's, and incidentally, just to give you a sense, this is the deed in question. It's folded up, and I won't try and open it for fear of damaging it, but that just gives you a sense of really just how small these deeds are. And if that is a forgery, then this deed is probably our oldest. It genuinely dates to about 1150. It's a tiny little thing, and you might see the size of your thumb at the bottom. That's actually the seal that's been put into a little bag in order to protect it, and it would have been put into that probably not long after it was created, and has been left there ever since. We have about 200, 300 medieval deeds, but we have many deeds of various other descriptions from much later. And amongst the most impressive, certainly, are what's called letters patent. And this is a royal grant from Queen Mary and King Philip. It's dated the 1st of May, 1555. And this gives royal permission to Thomas White to found the college. We have about 20 of these letters patent from various monarchs, and they always take the same shape. They're huge things. They're about sort of a metre wide. I'm not sure if you can see my hands here, but they always heavily decorated, and they always have a portrait of the monarch, or the monarchs in this case, in the initial letter, where there we see Mary and Philip enthroned. They always have the Great Seal attached to them. The Great Seal is the seal that the Lord Chancellor theoretically keeps. The one on here, as you can see, is quite badly damaged. So I'm going to show you ones from another set of letters patent we have. And this is Mary before she married Philip. So it's just Mary alone. And you always see, again, the monarch enthroned on one side, and on the other side, you see them on horseback, and Mary, of course, here is riding side saddle. Amongst the other very visually impressive estate records we have are, of course, maps. We have about 400 maps in the archive, although most of these are actually different editions of the Ordnance Survey maps, in which the college has quite often coloured in the properties we own, which is very useful, in fact, for working out when we sold various properties. But what I thought I'd do is to show you 4 of the rather nicer maps. This one is the earliest we have. It was drawn in 1600, and it's a map of Bagley Woods, which is just south of Oxford, and which the college still owns part of it. The founder gave the wood to the college. The idea was not that it would raise income like most of the other properties he gave the college, but that owning a wood, we would never be short of either firewood or timber for building, which shows, I think, quite how clever the founder could be. This next map dates from the same century, but at the other end, it's in 1686. And this is the estates of the Rawlinson family in Wasperton in Warwickshire. The son of so the man who owned the estate at this point, 2 of his sons attended St. John's. There were no children the next generation, and the younger of them, Richard Rawlinson, left all his estates to the college, which is how we have the map. I think this is not only just a nice, colourful map on parchment, but what is quite unusual is that we also have the family's coat of arms, and also what I take to be the family's manor house drawn onto the map, which is rather nice. We come to a few maps now from North Oxford. This one dates to 1769 and shows the whole of the parish of St. Giles. North is to the right-hand side of the map. And generally, what seems to be happening here is that whenever the shading of a particular plot is coloured, it belongs to the college, and whenever it's grey, it doesn't belong to the college. So I'm not sure if you can see my mouse or not, but this whole stretch of land in the middle here, and much of the land here to the east, was never owned by the college. That's part of Summertown now, but most of the southern parts were owned by the college and form what we now call the suburb of North Oxford. And one can see on this map, right at the southern end, those gardens are part of the college gardens, and then there's a strip of land that belongs to the president. What's quite surprising is that one of our major tenants is none other than the Duke of Marlborough, who is renting large parts of North Oxford from us, as you can see, and who also at the same time had as his townhouse St. Giles House, which he rented from us. And the last of the maps I want to show you is the same area, but a century on. This map was drawn up in 1871, but I don't know if you can make out on here, there are slightly different shades of red, and that actually shows that this map was still being amended in the 1930s. And this, I think, was kept in the bursary as the main management map of North Oxford. It's a huge map. I've never fully unrolled it. And in fact, this is the other item in the archive that lives in a wooden box. So here we can see the college site very clearly. It's fascinating to see how the gardens were laid out in 1871. But what mostly it does, as we can see here, is just show the properties that the college began to have built on the site from the 1860s around to the 1890s. You can see a nice bit of social engineering here. I think it's quite clear that those to the east of the Banbury Road are what the college called villas, and you can see these rather large detached properties with large plots. To the west is is terraces, which the college referred to artisan housing. Not of the very poorest, but clearly they were keeping the richer and poorer apart. And in fact, in later years, by the early mid-20th century, many of these properties, these terrace properties in places like Plantation Road and Observatory Street, were where not just the St John's, but the staff, or the servants as they were called them, of most of the Oxford colleges lived. What I also love about this map, you can see right in the middle, there's a plot belonging to University College and one belonging to Lincoln. They look empty. In fact, there were plenty of houses built there, but the creators of this map just didn't bother to include anything that didn't belong to St John's. And I rather like the idea that if St John's didn't own it, it simply didn't exist. Excuse me a moment. We're going to move away from estates records now. Though in fact, probably about half of the archive, I would guess, is made up of estate records. But we do have one other rather attractive form of records, which are a series of pedigrees that we have. And the reason we have them is that between 1562, when those statutes were drawn up, and the 1860s, when they were rewritten, there was 6 fellowships out of the 50 that were reserved for what's called founders' kin. Now, Sir Thomas White didn't have any children. If he had, they would have inherited and we wouldn't have the college. But he still felt the need to recompense other members of his family who might have expected to receive some money. And so this category of fellowship was created, which meant that if you could prove your descent from any of the founders' grandparents, then you were entitled to try and claim one of these 6 places. And this pedigree is drawn up for precisely that purpose. If we look at the top half, sorry, it's a little bit blurred, but one can see, again, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse here, but if so, this is Sir Thomas White, the founder of St John's. Here is his mother, and here is his grandfather, Henry Kibblewhite. Rather confusingly, his father was called White and his mother was called Kibblewhite. And then at the bottom half, we see the descendants of the Abington family. It's not entirely clear who this is for because they didn't actually get a place at college. They could obviously prove that they had the right to, but presumably there was somebody else who was also founders' kin, who the college regarded as a rather more better person to have as a fellow, must have got the place. But it's presumably John Abington, who's the only son on the bottom line here. But what's interesting is we can see that there are various things added to this to attest to the fact that this is true. We have the coats of arms of the various families. We have 3 members of the Waldron family who were, the Waldrons were cousins of the founder's mother. And we have somebody called Henry Martin, who's presumably another family member, all of whom are signing this to say, yes, I know from my personal knowledge that this is correct. And just to make it even certain, on the other side, we have Richard St. George Norroy, King of Arms. So this is one of the 3 most senior heralds in the College of Arms. And he too is saying, yes, this is true. This person is descended from the founder's maternal grandfather. Not though, sadly, it did him any good in the end. One other type of record we have going almost right back to the foundation are account books. The main series known as the Computus Annui, so the annual accounts, which is where, of course, we get our term computer as counting machine. This is the oldest set of accounts, which dates to 1568. So effectively just 10 years after the college was really up and running. Sadly, you can see that some damage has occurred to it. I suspect it's water damage, though it could possibly be a rodent nibbling away at the bottom. I would like to stress that this was done decades, if not centuries, before it came into my custody. Here one can see in that tiny writing a list of all of the fellows, and I think this is the stipends they're receiving. There might be their battles, and I'd just like to point out, if you can see that, the 4th name down, which I've underlined, Mr. Campion, one of the founder's protege. He read the homily at the founder's funeral and is one of our famous earlier fellows, Edmund Campion, and Saint Edmund Campion, who is either a saint and martyr or a convicted traitor, depending on your point of view. But certainly one, I think, of 3 Catholic saints who have been members of the college. This is what the book looks like in 1790. It's become a much larger book. It's over 1 meter high, I would have said. You might just be able to make it. I actually had to stand on a stepladder to be able to take this photograph. And I just thought this one might be interesting as well. If your eyesight is extremely good, you might just be able to make out Master Austin near the top and just Austin nearer the bottom. These are James and Henry Austin, the brothers of Jane Austen, and they're both fellows, but they come in different places because they're of different status at this point. So at the top, we have, they've got Mr. in front of their name. They're all the people who have taken the Master of Arts. They've taken their MA degree. Then after the clerk and councillor chaplain, the organist, we come to a group of half a dozen or so with Sir in front of their name, and they have all taken the Bachelor of Arts degree. And then from Powys onwards, we just have surnames, and those are still fellows, but they're still undergraduates. They haven't yet taken a degree at all. And so the elder brother is a master, and the younger brother is still an undergraduate. And in fact, the reason why they're both fellows is that they too were founders' kin. This is a much less impressive looking pedigree, but this shows that James Austen was descended from Sir Thomas White's paternal grandfather, which was John White. Although George Austen, James, Henry and Jane's father, had been a fellow, he was a fellow because he had attended Tonbridge School, and he married Cassandra Lee, and it was Cassandra who could claim descent from the founder's grandfather. Her brother was a student at St. John's. He did B.Phil here, my mind's gone, it's the law degree, sorry, my mind's gone blank as to exactly which letters those are. He, almost certainly I would suggest that George Austen met his future wife through her brother. And so I always like to think that St. John's can claim responsibility for the very existence of Jane Austen. One more account book I'd like to show you, which I think is quite interesting, because this is the account book for the building of Canterbury Court, which was paid for by William Laud, then Archbishop of Canterbury. So we have a page here which just shows the weekly payments made to the master mason, John Jackson. another page that shows various miscellaneous payments, including that if you just make it out in rather larger type for Gaudi's at the laying of the first stone, which I think is rather nice. And then we have the final page, which shows how much it all cost. Originally, there was an estimate of £1,005, which would have been a very large amount of money in the 1630s. But this page, I'm afraid I can't quite read the top of it because it's slightly obscured by various things on my machine, but it's basically saying that this is the full disbursements for His Grace's new buildings at St John's College, Oxon. And then at the bottom, right at the bottom, you can see it's grown from £1,000 to £5,553, 7 shillings and 5p, which is an extraordinarily large amount of money for the 1630s. Having said that, he celebrated it by a large party in Canterbury Court, including the King and Queen and most of the court, the Royal Court, as well as the university. And that party cost £2,666, which is almost as half the building of Canterbury Quad itself. Sadly, those accounts are in the National Archives and not with us. It'd be rather fun to have the costs of the full party. So these are the sort of things we have for the early modern period. We start to develop a much larger variety of things, which tell us a bit more about the people who were members of the college from the mid-19th century onwards. And of course, one group of records like that are photographs. And given the collection of matriculation and sports teams photographs we have, we probably have many of you in photographs in the archive. But I thought I'd share with you an earlier one. This is the fellows of the college, sometime probably in the 1860s. I rather like the stovepipe hat right in the middle, and the gentleman on our right as we look at it, who hasn't been able to keep still for long enough and is therefore very blurred as a result. The president at the time was this man right in the middle, Philip Winter. And he was succeeded by the man a little bit behind him, James Bellamy. Between them, they were presidents of St John's for over 80 years. And in fact, the predecessor, Samuel Dennis, became president in 1795, then Philip Winter in 1828, James Bellamy in 1872, and he retired just a few months before dying in 1909, which meant there were only 3 presidents covering the whole of the 19th century. Their main result was to create one of the more conservative colleges in Oxford. And James Bellamy was the leading member of what he called the Non-Platchett Society, which was set up to fight reform throughout the university at every level. And this resulted in it being regularly said that Gilbert Murray was the greatest scholar of his generation, despite having been at St John's. And the story from which we start that at the beginning of the 20th century to where we are today is a very interesting one, but not one for today, I think. And I'll just end with one final item, which again gives a sense of the people who were here. And there are various things I could have picked, but I decided to pick a page from the JCR suggestion book, which many of you might remember. I think this would be earlier than any of you will remember, but I'm sure many of you, we have other volumes with many of you in it, I suspect. So this page, which I picked, the bottom half is sort of rather typical. It's a slightly scurrilous, slightly smutty poem that somebody's written in, but I rather like what's at the top. Is there any reason unknown to the uninitiated freshman why the bloody JCR clock is always approx a quarter of an hour late? Signed, yours, P.A. Larkin. And I rather like the idea that while everybody else is writing experimental poetry, our future great poet is simply moaning about the bloody clock. So I think I will leave that there just to give you a flavour of some of the what I hope you'll agree are some of the more interesting and attractive items we have, and I'll hand back to Mohammed Salah to see if any of you have questions that you would like to ask.